Good morning, Breakfast Clubbers. Agent of Doubt here, and I've been ruminating on some of the things that got that funk Paul put into one of his videos. It was a clip of another YouTuber, and just I've been thinking a lot about the financial straits that we're in my country and just all over the world, and how there's so many different people with so many different ideas about how to fix it, and a lot of those ideas are in direct opposition to other ideas on how to fix it. And I think part of what I'm feeling is a sort of financial nostalgia that is like ingrained into my brain from when I saw prices of things at a certain level when I first saw them. And now I cannot fathom those prices being anything different, you know? So, for example, a can of soda, right? I remember as a kid seeing vending machines where sodas were 50 cents. Nowadays, when I look at a soda machine in any of the places that I might work, it's closer to $1.75 to $2 for a plastic bottle of soda that holds about as much soda as a 12-ounce can would have anyway. And on top of that, because I work at a lot of healthcare facilities, it's always diet soda options or light Gatorade, where it's like half calories, and it's disgusting swill, and I don't want it anyway. But the fact that it's like $1.75 to $2 like sends me into shock of thinking, holy shit, that's the kind of prices that you would pay in an airport for soda, where they have a captive audience, you know. But no, that's not even true anymore, because it's actually closer to $4 to $5 for a soda at the airport, and this is like the same as when people are at the movie theater. That audience that is not allowed to bring in their own food and beverage has to pay, you know, the captive audience price of the establishment. But for me, like, I'm always drawn back to, like, okay, that much soda should be worth 50 cents. And if you buy it in a grocery store, then it should be worth 25 cents. You know, it's 50 cents for the convenience of having it in the vending machine. And this price point is just so ingrained into my head. I cannot explain how weird I feel when I see prices varying from that, right? Similarly, I used to see candy bars for $1 or 50 cents at a certain size, and now when I see them in gas stations for, you know, $2.50 for a regular Hershey's candy bar that's actually a little bit smaller than I remember it being when I was growing up, I cannot bring myself to purchase that thing, because the price is so often, it seems so gouging when I see it, that it's not the price that I remember growing up. In a grocery store growing up for me, that same candy bar would have been 25 cents to 33 cents, you know. And of course, I heard stories from my father about how he used to be able to go down to the gas station and get an entire sack of candy this big for 5 cents. Of course, he was getting things like atomic fireballs and saltwater taffy, but still, like a sack this big for 5 cents. he told me that story way too many times. For me, my price point is set at a different spot, but it's still firmly in my head. Holy shit, how is it costing this much now when it was only that much before? In 1997, I was in the Tacoma, Washington area. I was stationed at Fort Lewis, and on the way out from that Army post, there was a shopette that had a gas station connected to it, and gas, if you filled up on post before you left, it was 99 cents a gallon, right? And off post it was something like $1 and change, right? Depending on how far you were away from the interstate, and how close you were to bigger cities like Seattle and whatnot, the price would go up a little bit. It was like a premium, but still, it wasn't exceeding $2 anywhere at all, and it was only recently in everybody's memory that it had exceeded $1. And I know that there were strikes in the 70s, like even before I was born. There were like gas shortages and whatnot that sent prices high, and why would they even have billboards that had that extra digit for gas prices if it wasn't going to be needed? There were a lot of billboards back in the day that for that extra digit, all they had was like 2 strips of light just to be able to make the number 1 if they ever needed it. But they couldn't fathom that the prices would ever, in the lifetime of that sign, go beyond $1.99, because they didn't make the sign wide enough for the rest of that 1 digit to be anything but a 1. I remember these times, and I've talked about all these different pricings, I guess, to get to this point where there's a back end to this like psychological price nostalgia that I feel, and that is when we're talking about wages, right? So for my first job, when I was working minimum wage, this was 20 years ago, the minimum wage was $4.25, right? And it had been there for a very long time. I got a raise at my job for being good at my job and taking on a position of like lower level management of the crew that I was working on. It was the inserting crew for a printing press, right? And then the minimum wage raised while I was working that job beyond the point where I had gotten the raise. So over the course of a few months, I went from $4.25, the hiring spot that I got in at, which was minimum wage. I had gotten like 30 cents of a raise, and then minimum wage got hiked above the point where I had my raises, and when it did that, my boss did not give me an extra 30 cents over where it was raised to, which was 5 and a dime. My boss gave me 5 and a dime, right? And I remember taking home checks of like $300 and thinking, oh my goodness, this is a lot of money. And then seeing that it was really hard for me to hold down the trailer that I was renting in a trailer park, and really budgeting things out. And I realized that it would take me forever at that rate to be able to save up enough money to buy a car and, get a mortgage and whatnot. Nowadays, that's such a pitiful amount of money in the place where I live, in the Denver metro area, that you wouldn't even be able to consider that much money like a job. It would be negligible for the purposes of being considered for any assistance. Oh, you make $300 every 2 weeks? We're still going to give you the max amount of food stamps because you don't make shit. That's the difference as far as inflation goes from back then to now. But I remember very vividly that 4 1/4 was it had an assonance to it because 4 and quart rhyme, and then 5 and dime, they rhyme, and so it lodged itself into people's heads. And every raise of the minimum wage has been something that just gets memorized by people. And a new group of people hit the workforce, and they learn that is the minimum wage, and it just gets set in their heads, and they think that is the value of an hour of unskilled labor work. And what really stands out to me is when I was making 4 1/4, I knew a nurse that was making $15 an hour, and I used to think that was a hellacious amount of money, that she, as a nurse, was making 3 times what a minimum wage worker made. That was excellent for her, right? And she, and again, this is 20 years ago. She had switched careers in the middle of her life, and she didn't have that much experience being a nurse, but she put in the hard work to get a certification and a degree, and get a trade, and she made $15 an hour, and I aspired to making $15 an hour from the point of 4 1/4. And at that time, what I was looking at is, if I were to get a degree, then maybe I would be able to, in whatever field I'm in next, after minimum wage unskilled labor work, maybe I'll be able to make 3 to 4 times what somebody on minimum wage will make. So, over time, minimum wage rose a little bit in the last 20 years. And it's at least doubled from where it was when I entered the workforce, right? I can't even tell you what it is, really, but I think the absolute bottom you can make in America is like $8.75 right now. But each city has its own minimum wage laws, pretty much, and every state does. So it's like, it's different wherever you go. And so there's a lot of people trying to fight for the $15 minimum wage, right? Bernie Sanders has said it. A lot of different Democrats have said that seems like a better living wage for a minimum wage to be set at $15. Well, meanwhile, prices of things have fluctuated to the point where, in some areas, like here in Denver, $15 is not going to be something that you could live off of either very easily. You're never going to save up and buy a house at that rate, right? What I'm actually paying more attention to is, bear with me here, if the minimum wage was $15 an hour, I would then be put in this position where my skilled labor, I'm not going to be making even twice what minimum wage is, right? Now, mind you, 20 years ago, when I was entering the workforce at minimum wage at 4.25, I was looking at a nurse who had only gone through 4 years of night school in order to get a nursing degree, and then she starts making a little bit more than 3 times, like 3.5 times what a minimum wage worker works. And that's like at the bachelor's level, right? And now here I am, above the bachelor's level, right? And I'm going back into grad school even. But the jobs that I'm going to be able to get with the degrees and the licenses, none of them are multiples of what the minimum wage is going to be. I'd say you can't find in the behavioral fields many jobs that are going to be, in excess of $30 in order to be twice what the minimum wage will be, and is for some companies like Amazon. As of November 1st, all of their employees make $15. McDonald's in the Denver metro area, you get 15 an hour easy. It's the de facto minimum wage for a lot of jobs in a lot of places. Starbucks and whatnot. Baristas make that much. And I'm astounded at how the skilled trades seem to have the same kind of locked-in price nostalgia that I have for a candy bar or a can of pop, in that, say, a plumber, like an emergency plumber, if you had a pipe burst, you might have in your head a figure anywhere between $30 and $50 an hour that guy is going to be billing you, right? And I don't know when it was that you got that idea of that price range, but I'm thinking if everybody else is experiencing things the same way I am, that price hasn't been going up. Same thing with mechanics. You expect to only pay a certain amount for work. And employers, I think, expect to only pay a certain amount for skilled laborers. And it's the minimum wage that keeps climbing, in people's minds faster than what they're willing to pay for skilled labor, which has been really stagnant in my experience. When I left the Army and I started doing electronics calibration, just like I was doing in the Army, for General Electric, I started making about $20 an hour. And that was 20 years ago, right? Almost. 17 years ago, right? 16 years ago, sorry. But anyways, at that point in my life, I was making near 4 times what minimum wage was. Now, I had a couple raises while I was at GE for that 4-year period in my life. And it got to where I was making 4 times what minimum wage was. Fast forward a couple decades, and I had, one of those change of careers that happens in a lot of people's lives. I just couldn't do hard labor anymore as a disabled vet, and I realized that early on that I needed to start transitioning into a different field where I was not going to have to be beating myself up every day and coming home sore every day. And I think I did pretty good by switching over to the behavioral fields that I'm in. But I'm now back up to that point where I was making money in that previous career. You know, I ended as a journeyman wireman in the union, making, you know, almost $30 an hour. I did hurricane recovery work after Hurricane Ike in Beaumont, Texas, and that was about the pinnacle of my earnings potential as an electrician, as my body was just giving out on me. And so that's where I got to. And now I started at the bottom of the totem pole and climbed my way back up again. I'm back up to almost 30 an hour, right? And now what I'm facing is, instead of being 4 times the amount that minimum wage is that I'm making, I'm only making 2 times, right? And if minimum wage keeps climbing, it's probably going to climb faster than any of the raises that I get. Now, my counterparts that stayed electricians, it's not like they kept on getting raises and that they're making more money now, right? It's not too long ago that I was still an electrician. And I know that the scale in the Denver metro area is still stagnantly around that level, right? And people just won't accept skilled labor making better than $50 an hour, you know. But if we're going to scale it back down to when I started as somebody in the workforce, and I was looking at, you know, up at nurses who were making 3 to 3.5 times minimum wage, and that's what I was aspiring to, is to you know, advance my career to the point where I'm going to make that much money and be able to save and be able to buy a house and a car and whatnot. If we try to scale this to today's terms, if minimum wage is $15 an hour, then a nurse or an electrician or a plumber or anything at the bachelor's level, you know, should be $45 to $50 an hour. That's what they should be making, right? Just to keep the incentive to getting an education there. I mean, why would anyone go get the student debt and go through the years of hard work to get that piece of paper, and then the years of unpaid, sometimes internship work, and, you know, bottom of the totem pole work to work your way up in the career? Why would you do all that when you can make just as much money by just taking whatever job comes your way at the unskilled level? You know, why? Why do we not value people's work enough to pay them more? Why do we have it locked in our heads that, no, somebody who is in this type of career at this level makes the same amount of money that they made 20 years ago, even though we expect the minimum wage to progressively climb with the cost of living at a rate that just does not correlate to the rate that we would put all of the other professions into. And what I keep coming back to is, like, we are locked in to our thinking about how much people should be making by some form of price nostalgia. You know? And if we're going to really fix our economy and do well and prosper, I feel like we need to address the parts of our own psyche that lock our minds into thinking that certain things are still only worth what they were worth in our childhood. And I feel like this video is probably long enough for the Breakfast Club. So yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe. Tweet at Paul It's at Got That Funk, and tell him, don't let us down this week. Post some original content that was made for us, because we're here for Paul. That's why we're all watching, right? Let's put all of this pressure on Paul. All of it. Okay. Talk to you later.